Yesterday, Venom Let There Be Carnage opened in theaters. So now it's time to rank every Spider-Man movie from worst to best. Now I know, okay, Venom isn't technically a Spider-Man movie, I get it, but Venom is such an iconic and important character to the Spider-Man comics. He basically is his equivalent to the Joker. He is to Spider-Man what Joker is to Batman, because he is so important, because he is sort of like this evil version of him. I feel it's only fair to include Venom movies in a Spider-Man ranking. So, let's get started. Coming to last place at number 10 is Spider-Man 3. I don't really have anything to complain about in this movie that hasn't already been complained about by everybody else for years. It has too many characters, too many plot lines, too many stupid and bad ideas, and very poor dialogue. Even Sam Raimi, the director, and the actors hate it. Sam Raimi didn't want to have Venom in the last act of the movie. He wanted to save him for a future movie. But Sony insisted and basically required that he throw Venom in there at the last second. And of course, Topher Grace was very miscast as Venom, because Eddie Brock is supposed to be this big hunk, because Venom was created around the time that there was a really big steroid epidemic, especially in rural New York, so he was sort of made as a metaphor for drugs, specifically meth, and so that was sort of like the dangers of it. But no, we're going to get Topher Grace, this skinny kid, to be this guy who's supposed to be like a guy who lifts weights every day when he comes home. On top of that, the writing was just awful. So many bad scenes, so many bad ideas, and everybody hates this movie, and it's well warranted. It deserves every bit of hate it gets. Number 9, Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's a bit more entertaining than Spider-Man 3 because it's at least watchable, but it still suffers from many of the same problems as Spider-Man 3. Specifically, too many villains, because this was trying to set up for a Sinister Six film that never ended up coming out anyway. Electro's motivations are stupid, but it does have a very gut-punch ending. Number 8, Amazing Spider-Man, a reboot that nobody wanted, that doesn't even really need to exist because it came out only 10 years after the first movie. Now, on its own, it's a perfectly fine film, but it does feel like they took what they had ideas for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4, because the Lizard was supposed to be one of the villains in Spider-Man 4, and they basically took all of those ideas, got rid of Sam Raimi, and just retooled what they had to be a reboot. Now, it may have worked better had it not been an origin story, because you can technically do a reboot of Spider-Man and have it not be an origin story, as evidenced by Homecoming, but we'll never know. But as an origin story, it feels pretty redundant. May have been better had it been more on its own. Number 7, Venom. This movie, again, is perfectly fine, but the first half suffers from pacing issues. Eddie Brock doesn't even become the character of Venom until about halfway through the film. Some of the dialogue needs work, it's very cartoony, and it feels very much like a 90s movie. Like, I think maybe like they handed the computer to the 12-year-old and said, "Here, 12-year-old son, write the third act." If it were a cartoon, it would work a little better, but since it's a live-action film, it feels very out of place with some of the dialogue, but it is still a very entertaining movie. Number 6, Venom Let There Be Carnage. This takes everything that was good about the first movie, specifically the dynamic between Eddie and Venom and their love-hate relationship and their buddy cop relationship, and it gives us more of that. And Woody Harrelson is fantastic as the villain Carnage. He is very, very creepy. He was very well cast. But the middle act of the film drags with scenes that are played for humor and don't have any effect on the plot. They just kind of exist for the sake of having humor, and they just kind of fill up the runtime. Time that should have been better spent fully developing Carnage. Because as good as Carnage was, what they gave us of him was really good, but I feel he should have been more fleshed out instead of the middle act basically kind of being inconsequential. Number 5, Spider-Man Far From Home. The plot in this one is better than Homecoming, but the reason it's slower than Homecoming is a lot of the humor in it is really inappropriate for a PG-13 movie, especially a Spider-Man movie, specifically the infamous scene between Peter Parker and the female S.H.I.E.L.D. agent that I already complained about my MCU ranking. But the villain Mysterio is well acted, and the plot is better. However, I think that Zendaya has no chemistry with Tom Holland, and she is a huge problem. Number 4, Spider-Man. At a time when we hadn't really cracked the formula yet for superhero movies, this is actually one of the better ones. It is a bit cheesy, but it feels like the 60s comics. The comics were cheesy, and it feels very much like they were taking everything from the 60s comics until it got rebooted as Ultimate Spider-Man, which was a little bit more grounded in reality. But they took what they had, and I think they worked very well. It is a great story. It is a great origin story. Willem Dafoe is fantastic as Goblin. It's one of the better Spider-Man movies. Number 3, Spider-Man Homecoming. Spider-Man's first MCU solo movie is a lot of fun. Feels like an 80s teen movie, and it relies a little bit too much on Iron Man, though. Iron Man, as the side character in the movie, very much distracts. It feels like he kind of removes Spider-Man from the spotlight of his own movie a little bit. He doesn't really need to be in the movie as much as he is. Number 2, Spider-Man 2. Absolutely fantastic villain in Dr. Octopus, who isn't really a villain, at least not at first. He doesn't make his arms with the intention of being a villain. He just kind of slowly becomes a villain throughout the movie, and he ends up redeeming himself. So he is a very well-told, well-fleshed-out character. It has a really great ending and destroys the relationship of Harry Osborn and Peter Parker, and I was so pumped to see how that would play out in Spider-Man 3, and what we got in Spider-Man 3 was such a disappointment. But Spider-Man 2 is one of the greatest sequels ever, one of the greatest superhero sequels ever. But coming in at number 1 is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Every single character in this movie is a delight, and they all have a very unique animation style. Miles Morales is more of the traditional comic book style. Penny Parker is more of an anime style. Spider-Ham is animated in the style of Looney Tunes. Spider-Man Noir is very black and white 30s, and apparently he sees everything around him as black and white, as evidenced by the fact that he can't solve a Rubik's Cube because he sees everything as black and white. The comic book elements of it play out very well. The animation is fantastic. The story's fantastic. The characters are fantastic. The humor's fantastic. All of it is amazing. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share a ranking of all the Spider-Man movies, including Venom and Venom Let There Be Carnage, and let me know what you thought.